Everybody, can you hear me?
Hey, Rory.
How you doing, Joe?
Good. How are you?
Good. I haven't seen you in a while.
I know. Keep me chained to my desk.
Have you been going in the office at all or mostly working from home?
Half and half.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Jason, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right.
Good, good.
I haven't stepped outside today. Is it hot?
It's hot. It's cooling down now, but man, it was a scorcher. So I'm looking forward to the kids going back to school so I can actually get my my office back without all the background noise.
Absolutely. And my daughter starts virtual kindergarten on the 1st. So that's going to be interesting to see how virtual kindergarten works.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting.
Like a virtual nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many do you have at home, Roy?
2.
Two. Yeah.
So my oldest will be 5 in a month, and then my youngest will be 2 at the end of November.
All right.
So my wife has her hands full. She got the hardest job in the house.
No kidding. I have 3, 8, 5, and 3. So it's, the virtual. If you've ever walked into a kindergarten or preschool classroom and then you just imagine that in your own home is essentially what that's going to be. So I wish your wife Godspeed.
Yes, no doubt about it.
He deserves it.
Who is the bottom? It just says side of Peninsula.
That's my colleague Madison. It's so she can live stream this.
Got it. Okay, cool.
So now everyone in the world knows how old our children are, Roy. Yeah.
Does anybody have any real personal information that they would like to share?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How you doing, Emil?
Or talent.
Hey, I'm doing well.
Good. Amanda, you doing all right today?
Doing great. Thanks for asking.
Good. It looks like you've got a pretty cool room that you're working out of.
Yeah, it's our upstairs office. So.
Gotcha. Kind of neat with the way that the ceiling is.
Yeah, it's definitely upstairs.
Gotcha.
Right.
We'll just wait a few more minutes here, then we'll get started. How you doing, Trent? Greg or Amy, or are you aware of anybody that's unable to make it today?
Nope. Everyone said they could make it.
Okay. I think the only person that is not, is it Darren? You the only one who's not here?
Darren and Heather.
Heather.
Got it.
I talked to Heather maybe 15 minutes ago and she was driving home. So she is coming.
Got it. What about Darren?
I tried to call him and he did not respond. And in my voicemail, I said, I assume I'm going to see you at 5 o'clock and we can talk after.
Okay.
There's
There's
Heather.
Heather.
Hey, Heather. Do we want to give Darren a few more minutes, or do we want to get started?
Since I've already texted him, maybe Ben or Heather could.
Yeah, I'll text him.
I'm going to be an official stalker, and I like to be an unofficial stalker.
Got it.
We don't want to change your status. I'll text him.
While we're waiting, I know Joe couldn't make our last meeting. Joe, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Rory. Yeah, I'm Joe Schuler. I'm the CFO for CDDC in Capital South, and I'm also the treasurer of the River South Authority, which is an existing NCA. So I have a little bit of experience with this, although I think this one will be different in that there will be taxes collected and that sort of thing, which the River South Authority does not do. But looking forward to being part of this.
Great.
Yeah, I believe Amy recommended you for a myriad of duties on the last call. So
I was told since I didn't attend, I would probably have a plate full of duties.
Exactly.
Yeah, fair enough.
How you doing, Heather? All right. I think we should get ready here. So for our meeting agenda, we'll calling to order here. We'll do our roll call. I'm just going to go by the order of people on our screen. Joe Schuler.
Here.
Emil.
Here.
Ben.
Here.
Amanda.
Here.
Trent.
Here.
Heather.
Here.
All right. Jason.
Here.
Heather. Heather, you here? I can see you.
For the love, I keep going on mute. I'm still here. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Amy.
Here.
Darren.
Here.
And Rory. I'm here. Next on our agenda, we have I know that Greg did what was required in terms of public notice. Greg, can you just maybe give a little bit more detail into how this has been communicated to the public?
Yeah, the main way is the same ways we did for the last meeting, Rory. We did publish a notice in the Columbus Dispatch and the legal notices. We also posted it on the NCA website that's hosted by CDDC. And then, Rory, we did send it to the city. I don't know if it made its onto the city website, but I think it did. So
yep,
we got the word out there. And so the certificate of public notice is submitted. And hey, Amy, if we aren't already, I know there's been a request to record these meetings. So I don't know if there's like a record button that needs to be hit.
Let me figure that out and I will get back to you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
Yep.
Next item on the agenda is the minutes from our August 10th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
So moved by Ben. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Trent Smith.
And Rory, it looks like Darren has joined. Apologies for interrupting, but
Gotcha. No, thanks a lot, Ben. Is there any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? And any abstentions? All right. Next, we have reports and communications from officers of the board. I know that that there's been a very, very busy few weeks between our last meeting and this one. I know that a lot of that is going to be covered in the motions and resolutions that we're going to be voting on tonight. September 1st is the closing for the project. And I know that all the agreements are being put together. Is there any other reports or communications that any of the other officers or any of the board members want to share? All right. And then next on the agenda is other reports and communications. As far as I know, there's no other reports or communications to share unless, Greg, you are aware of anything?
Nope.
Okay. Greg or anyone else, are you aware of any public comments that we've received since our last meeting?
Rory, my office has not received any public comments. I don't know if any board members have received anything, or Amy, if anything has come in to CDDC or Cap South.
Not to me.
Okay, so we'll get right into our resolutions tonight. So the first one is resolution number 2020-4. Greg, if you could give a report to the board about that resolution.
Sure thing, Rory. And Amy, I don't know, is there a way to share this my screen or get that PDF that was included in the packet up? I think it'd be helpful. We did prepare a presentation to help with.
Greg, can you look at the bottom and see if you can share your screen? If not, I'll find the PowerPoint and I'll share it.
Yeah, it looks like there's a button. So let me.
Good, you did it.
So do you see the meeting packet there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And do you see the first part of the presentation for resolution 2020-4 there?
Yes.
Yes.
All shown up good for everyone? Okay, so this resolution 2020-4 is what I'll call the big guy. It wraps up basically everything the authority needs to do at the current time for High Water Alley and the city improvements that the authority is funding, except for one thing, which we'll get to for resolution 2020-5. But there's a lot of authorizations wrapped up in here because they all go together. And I just wanted to walk through and see if there's any board questions. So first thing, kind of the headliner, is it authorizes up to $8 million worth of bonds to be issued by the authority, and the expected bond purchaser is the Columbus Franklin County Finance Authority, like we talked about last time. It provides for a maximum interest rate on the bonds to be 6%. In reality, we are expecting something closer to 3.6% all in for an interest rate. And we really expect the bond amount to end up less than 7.5 million. There's still some pencil sharpening being done on final bond costs and project costs to be funded out of the bonds. So we think it's probably going to end up being less than 7.5 million, probably closer to 7 million for a total bond amount here. But the resolution provides an authorization up to 8 million in case we need to go up that high. We don't want to be short and be in a situation where we can't accomplish the project. The approximate sources and uses of bonds right now, $5.4 million for project costs. Again, there's pencil sharpening that might be reduced a little bit. There's capitalized interest of $850,000, basically taking us through the first 3 years of the project. And the reason we want that is eventually the bonds are going to be paid by charges and TIF revenue, tax increment financing revenue from the project, from the private development, but those aren't built yet. So until they're built and can start paying, a common method of bridging that gap between today and when the private development is built and paying is capitalized interest. So I would say in 99% of projects like this, we have some capitalized interest allowance. There is probably somewhere around $400,000 of cost of issuances all in. And then the finance authority, again, our bond purchaser, requires a bond reserve And this will fluctuate based on the total amount of bonds issued. It's always 10% of the principal amount. So for round numbers right now, 740,000. But again, that'll fluctuate based on the pencil sharpening and the final pricing of the debt once we go to the market and can actually price it. As we've discussed, these bonds are going to be repaid by a mixture of income to the authority. During the abatement period for the private development, that comes in the form of something called a fixed charge, which is an annual amount each developers have agreed to pay on their development. And that lasts for the abatement period. The city is providing, as part of the incentives for this project, a 15-year, 100% tax abatement because we are in the downtown abatement area for the city. Once that abatement expires, the city has also established a TIF area to generate tax increment financing revenue. So after the 15-year abatement period, we stop collecting the fixed charge and we flip over to the TIF period where the city pays us the TIF revenue they're collecting from the private development, and that pays our bonds. So we have two periods during the abatement where we are directly collecting money from the property owners, and then post-abatement where the city's getting that money through the tax collection process, and then they've agreed to pay that over to us.
Greg, I know we've talked about it before, but if you could remind people real quick what a TIF is and how money gets into the TIF.
Yep, sure thing. So a TIF, the easiest way to describe that is redirected property taxes. As we are doing improvements to the property, is the screen still up? I was trying to switch screens here.
Yep.
You guys still see resolution 2020-4?
Yes.
So Rory, as improvements get built on the private side, that of course raises the real property value. That raises taxes, but that incremental increase, that tax increment, is redirected from the normal places those new taxes would go into what's called a TIF fund. And then that TIF fund gets used to finance the public infrastructure that's necessary to make the private improvements possible to begin with. This is a very common tool that's used on a big percentage, I'd say many, perhaps most of the development projects in the city, in order to build the public infrastructure that's necessary to make the projects happen. The school district continues to get all the real property taxes that it would have otherwise gotten in the TIF. In other words, the school district is made whole because it is the biggest portion of real property taxes. It enjoys a special protection under law. But the rest of them, rest of the property taxes go into the TIF fund to fund these sorts of improvements. Again, an extremely common tool that the city uses often to make these sorts of projects happen, given the high cost of the public infrastructure necessary to make the project happen.
Hey, Greg, I have a quick question. So is that what the bond reserve is for, to make sure that those payments can be made even absent the contributions from the developers in that interim period before the TIF happens?
Not the bond reserve. It's the capitalized interest in that interim period.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The bond reserve is in case there's a default by the property owners in paying their taxes or the fixed charge.
Okay.
Basically, we got about a year to sue the property owners to recover the money before we default on the bonds.
Okay. All right.
Greg, can you?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can you explain the school piece again? So the money that normally would go to the school district that is being diverted to the TIF is not actually diverted to the TIF. The school district is made whole based on the existing property tax rate, or as the improvements are made based on the new property tax rate?
As the improvements are made and the taxes go up. Now, there is a 15-year tax abatement period that applies to any new development in downtown. So there's no taxes for the first 15 years on any of this. But, and there's also no TIF on any of this during the first 15 years. Once the abatement rolls off, the TIF kicks in, and the school district gets everything it would have otherwise received. In TIF lingo, it's called a non-school TIF, where that money actually never even makes its way to the city. When the county treasurer collects the taxes, it segregates out the school district's portion and sends that directly to the school district. City never touches it, we never touch it. So the remaining amount the city receives, the county treasurer will send that to the city auditor, who puts it in a special fund called a TIF fund, which has been assigned over to the authority pursuant to a TIF cooperative agreement we'll talk about in a minute. And that is the mechanism by which we get the money the city receives. But none of that money the city receives is any of the school district's money. School district is getting that directly from the county, just like usual.
Okay, thank you.
And I was just going to mention that the community reinvestment area that gives the 100% over 15 years, that's been in place, I want to say, since before 1994 for downtown. So this isn't anything new. This is really anybody who is doing new development or major renovation downtown is eligible for that. So this isn't any kind of special carve out for this project.
Right. And Roy, if I remember correctly, I think that was originally established in 1978. I think it goes back that far.
Wow.
All right. If there's no further questions, we'll go to the next one. And at this next slide, I wanted to start walking through the specific documents that are approved by this resolution, so you have a sense of those. There's a group of what I'll call bond documents. That is a trust agreement. That is probably about a 50-page document that only bond lawyers love. It establishes all the terms of the bonds. Think of it as a loan agreement. If you're familiar with loan agreements, it's got all the nuts and bolts of the loan that essentially the Columbus Franklin County Finance Authority is making to the community authority. So the trust agreement is our loan agreement. The bond purchase agreement is essentially like a security agreement. It's another part of the loan agreement between us and the Franklin County Finance Authority. And then finally, the tax increment financing and cooperative agreement is that agreement I mentioned a minute ago. That's where the city is agreeing to pay over the TIF revenue during that TIF period, the last 15 years of the bonds. So that those packaged together as essentially the loan agreement and the security agreements that we're entering into for the bonds. That sets all the terms. It's a very common set of documents. Again, it's things bond lawyers love to work with. If you need something to help go to sleep at night, happy to send you some copies. You can read through them. They'll put you right to sleep.
Hey, Greg,
Any questions on the bond documents?
Just one question on the TIF agreement. Is year one of the TIF, because it's a 30-year TIF, is year one begin once that agreement is executed, which would be hopefully in the next day or two here, or is year one after the 15 years?
It's not after the 15 years. The TIF, the 30-year TIF period triggers once there's a new improvement on the property that's recognized by the county auditor. So, construction will start this year. It might be a couple years before the county auditor picks up any new taxes and improvements on the property. So as soon as they do, that's when the TIF period starts. So, and then during the abatement period, again, the new taxes are going to be abated. There's not going to be any TIF revenue. When the abatements roll off, that's when there'll be TIF revenue going to the city, and that's when it will start coming to the authority to pay the debt service on the bonds. Okay. If there's no further questions on bond documents, the next set of documents are construction agreements. And this is exactly what you think it is. There's going to be probably a number of construction agreements that the NCA ultimately enters into. Currently, the expectation is the NCA would enter into essentially a construction administration or services agreement with Columbus Downtown Development Corporation's subsidiary for the project, which is Scioto Peninsula Holdings. And the idea there is Scioto Peninsula Holdings is going to do the day-to-day tasks of going out, bidding contracts with the end contractors for these improvements. They'll, deal with the day-to-day of dealing with the contractors, deal with issues that pop up. So we as a board don't have to do that. So in essence, it's taking the day-to-day obligations off this board of running a construction project, so we don't have to deal with it. The agreements will provide there's going to be mechanisms where we got to pay contractors. The contractors will submit draw requests probably on a monthly basis to the authority. Really, those will come to Joe as treasurer. So he'll review those, and then ultimately the bond proceeds, as well as developer contributions that we talked about at our last meeting, those will ultimately be used to fund those construction costs. Again, that's why we're all here talking about this stuff, is to spend the money to build High Water Alley and make it a great place. So I know there's some other considerations that Rory, maybe you want to touch on, or Amy, you want to touch on with how the improvements are being bid and will be bid going forward.
Gotcha. Amy, I'd like to defer to you on this because I know that we've already begun our first bidding effort. If you could inform the board about what we've done so far.
Sure. Thanks, Rory and Greg. The way we've looked at it as of right now is we are planning 2 bid packages that would go out to contractors. The first bid package has just gone out late last week, and it's for a small, narrow part of the work that needs to be done immediately. And that includes, we need to have electrical switch gears for distribution of the city's electric to all the developers. And we need to have stormwater detention for High Water Alley. It also will allow the developers to hook into this stormwater component so their sites can drain as they're constructing it. Then we're going to get out of the way and let the developers use this 50 feet of High Water Alley so that they can construct their facilities. And we'll come back in 2022, in the spring of 2022, and begin construction of High Water Alley. As you guys saw last time, it's a paver intensive street. So we didn't want to put all these nice pavers down, let the developers use it and have them break it and then have to repair them and have the developers have to pay for that. So the construction schedule that we're working out is we're going to be in here from about December through spring. So early winter through spring to do that first package. And then we're going to let the developers have access to High Water Alley. And then we'll come back in the spring of 2022 and actually build the street. So the package that just went out, I heard last time that there were questions from both Rory and Heather Whalen about how we're going to work on some diversity in suppliers. And we have put in there a goal of 15% participation for MBE, WBE. And we are reaching out to contractors with capacity to provide that. And we'll, assuming that we are going to be able to get that, we talked in the bid about both the NCA and Scioto Peninsula Holdings commitment to a diverse supplier workforce, and that we are committed to that promotion of MBE and WBE certified businesses. We also then offered within the bid the opportunity for the contractor to work with the City of Columbus and their Office of Diversity and Inclusion to make sure that their contractors are actually certified for the city, because we can only count them if they're certified by the City of Columbus, even if they're certified by the state or another city like Cincinnati or Cleveland. So the nice part is the Mayor's Office of Diversity and Inclusion will work with the contractor to get everyone certified that qualifies for this.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna just add a little bit more to that. That 15% was arrived at by reaching out to the city's Office of Diversity and Inclusion to find out, what is a reasonable goal for a project like this based upon the availability of minority contractors who do this work. So they're the ones who had recommended that number to us. And then secondly, on the next bid that goes out, which will be for the larger amount of work that's being done, what we'll do, my guess is, and Amy can elaborate more on the timeline, but it will be several months from now to when we're in a position that we would want to bid that work. And at that time, the city is concurrently undergoing a process to implement the recommendations of the disparity study that was done at the city. And we'll have, it could be 15% goal for that project. It could be 20, it could be 10. We will have, we'll dive into the work that's being done on that and looking at what is the appropriate goal for that project.
All right. Thanks, Rory and Amy. Any questions?
Are we requiring any staffing goals, minority or women staffing goals for some of the larger contractors coming through? Or are we just looking at subcontractors here?
Well, we're obviously, if the main contractor has it, that counts. If a subcontractor has it, it counts. So
Okay.
I don't think we specified how the contractor had to do it, just that they had to, that they had to, for the performance of portions of the work totaling in aggregate at least 15% of the contract sum.
Okay, thank you.
And as I mentioned before, Jason, since we have not finalized how the city is planning to do the implementation, I know that we are certainly moving towards having goals. I don't know if it has been determined yet if the city will have staffing goals on projects, but in the absence of that, we did want to make sure that we did have a goal for this project, even though it needed to go out quickly so that we meet the timelines of the development of the project.
All right. There's no other questions. We can go to the next slide here. The next agreement that this resolution approves is the contribution agreement with the city. If you recall from our last meeting, there's really two parts to the work that's being performed on behalf of the authority. Here, one is on Highwater Alley, which will be owned by the authority, and those will be directly contracted with the authority through Scioto Peninsula Holdings for that work. There's also a number of streetscape enhancements on other right-of-way streets that the authority does not own, and therefore can't really go onto those streets to do that work. So will be a contribution agreement with the city. The city will actually be doing that work and going out and bidding it and managing the construction. All the authority has to do is provide the money for that. So there is a contribution agreement for initially a little over $1 million. And then depending on how the city's bids come back for the work, up to about another $160,000 just based on costs. And the city is actively out there bidding at the moment for this work to figure out exactly what our final costs are here. It won't be higher than the combination of those two numbers. We don't really expect it to be lower than the $1 million number there. If it is, we get the money back. But again, this is work that will be funded with the bonds that we'll be issuing. We, of course, also will be owning property, the Highwater Alley, and the city, whenever they do enhancements to their right-of-way, require another party to take over maintenance responsibilities and fund that. So we have two maintenance agreements. One is a maintenance agreement with the city, where we agree to do what's necessary to take care of the right-of-way enhancements. And the other is with an entity called the Scioto Peninsula Association, which is an owners association comprised of the owners in the development area that we've been talking about. Basically, the Scioto Peninsula Association would be handling all the day-to-day maintenance for the authority, just like the Scioto Peninsula Holdings would be handling the day-to-day construction of the improvements. So we have during the construction period, Scioto Peninsula Holdings is doing our day-to-day work. Then flip over once construction's done, then we turn it over to the Scioto Peninsula Association and the ongoing owners of the private development to handle the maintenance of it, because they have the most vested interest in making sure that it's maintained properly and it continues to be appealing and enhances their own assets. We don't expect the annual maintenance amount to be too high at this point. Based on past experience with these sorts of streetscape improvements and maintaining an asset like High Water Alley, the developers and the folks at CDDC have put together some sample budgets, all of which project that the annual maintenance cost for High Water Alley and the city right-of-way enhancements are going to be less than $200,000 a year. That's for everything from repair to picking up trash to snow plowing to electric bills, things like that. So, for the scope of a development like this, it's not an incredibly high number, but there are some things that everyone's going to want done to make it, continue to be a first-class development. Any questions on the contribution agreement or the maintenance agreement at this point?
Yes, I do. So we're saying the Peninsula Holdings will be responsible for construction. Is there a scope in terms of dollar amount that they're responsible for? Or is, because if you get into maintenance, I don't know what maintenance, what the scope of maintenance would be in terms of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you determining what is construction? I mean, I get construction is the original construction of the alley and so on, but what is there a scope of what each, I guess, division will handle?
Yeah, on construction, there is definitely a scope and a whole set of plans to get to the substantial completion of High Water Alley. And the city, of course, has plans for its own streetscape improvements. And Amy, certainly jump in here to the extent you have more detail than what I am talking about. But there is about, I'd say, rough numbers, a $7 million scope of work for High Water Alley and the city right-of-way improvements. So that would be funded with the combination. If you recall a couple slides ago, there's $5.4 million, give or take, of bond proceeds. And there's another $1.8 million, give or take, of developer contributions to those costs. And those will vary a little bit as we get bids, as plans are finalized, as scope is finalized, but there is a very definitive set of plans and scope that's going to be managed as part of the construction process, getting to substantial completion, Amy, I think around fall of 2022, of all the city work as well as the High Water Alley work.
Correct.
So from that substantial completion point, then we flip over to the maintenance period. And that's where Scioto Peninsula Association, as the association of the owner, steps in and says, hey, okay, construction's done. Now we got to run the thing and perform the routine maintenance, do snow plowing, trash pickup, keep it a first class place that really benefits the development. So, Amy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, you did a great job, Greg.
Well, so to the extent that Peninsula Holdings is responsible for construction, at the end of construction, what does that entity become? Does it still remain? Is it accountable for anything? Is it? responsible for oversight of anything going forward?
So, and Greg, you can now jump in on me, but there are two things. One, it will be retained for any warranty issues. So anything usually 12 months after the construction is complete, if there's an issue, Scioto Peninsula Holdings would work with our contractor to make sure that is taken care of. The second thing is Scioto Peninsula Holdings is bigger than the 6 parcels that make up this NCA. We will be developing the entire 26 acres, of which this is 10 acres of. And so we'll still be there, still caring about everything, still making sure that the strong vision and strong architectural standards that are being set by this initial phase is taken through all the other construction and architecture that occurs on the Scioto Peninsula in the full scope of the 26 acres. But the association will look very specifically at what these 6 parcels will do and the improvements on those 6 parcels, making sure that they are snow plowed, making sure that repairs are being made, and then making sure that this looks and feels like a wonderful neighborhood that people want to come to. So it could be a little bit broader than just repairs and maintenance. I think there's a lot of vision that this will be about events and about drawing in people to come here more than just the people who live and work in this district.
Okay, that's fine. I was just trying to get a feel for, separation, or to the extent that they're tied together in terms of the overall project.
Did that answer your question? The separation is really Scioto Peninsula Holdings for this piece will be done when construction is over and warranties are complete. And the association will come in and run everything after that in this area.
Okay. Other questions from board members? Hearing none, we will flip over to the next slide. This resolution also authorizes easement agreements for High Water Alley. And these are basically a group of easements that are really, really common for these sorts of dense urban mixed use developments. The private property owners, the whole reason they're contributing to High Water Alley is to make sure it's there and available for them. So, for their developments, for their tenants, for their residents and employees, they have requested very typical easements for things like access, for foundation supports, parking, utilities, loading zones, kind of the nuts and bolts of running an alley, frankly. So that's an agreement between the authority and each of the property owners. So it requires board approval. So it's included here, but it's really kind of a nuts and bolts agreement for what is going to be happening in the alley and the intent and the intended use of the alley. In a similar vein, the easement agreements really are similar to the maintenance agreement with the Scioto Peninsula Association, in that they talk about the ongoing use, repair and maintenance responsibilities for High Water Alley. The resolution also authorizes something we're calling developer agreements, which each of the 3 developers. That's really for the construction period and shortly after. Developers, of course, want to know that the authority is going to do its job and construct High Water Alley. So in essence, the authority is obligating itself to do that with money that's raised by bonds and developer contributions. The authority is agreeing to use its best efforts to issue the bonds to the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority. The developers wanted that commitment, and it makes sense to make that commitment now, because the developers are buying the property now, but it's going to be a few months until the bonds are closed. So they want to make sure that even after they buy the property, we're going to continue to put one foot in front of the other and do what we need to do to issue the bonds to the finance authority. And then the final main point in these agreements with the developers is in the event there's excess money from developer contributions, If we come in under budget, if bids come in lower, that'll be a good day. We'll have excess money, and the developers wanted to say, because it's their money and how it's used. So the agreement provides that if we end up with excess developer contributions of that $1.8 million that we might not need to spend to do our job to build the high water alley and contribute to the city, that the money will be used for maintenance costs of high water alley, in essence, helping out the Scioto Peninsula Association with the maintenance of the alley, and then to provide the developers some relief on their initial community development charges that are due. Those are scheduled to start in 2023. They needed to make that commitment to make the bonds work, but they're obviously still going to be in their ramp up period because they're opening at the end of 2022. So the first couple of years of any new building, whether it's apartment, hotel, or an office building, are typically the tightest years on the private side. So if we have extra money, it's money they contributed in the first place. So it makes sense to use that to give them some relief from those as they get ramped up. So I'll pause there for a minute. Any questions on those? Okay. And that goes over to resolution 2020-5, which we'll get to in a minute. But Rory, that's the overview of 2020-4. I know that was a lot to take in. Happy to answer any other questions folks have before we get to a vote on the resolution.
Any other questions before we start voting? All right, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
So moved by Jason Jenkins and Trent Smith.
Second.
With the second. All right. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? And any abstentions? All right. Passage. Next, we have resolution 2020-5. Greg, if you could let us know give us the report on that.
Yeah, so resolution 2020-5 is, now that we've approved around $7 to $7.5 million of bonds that would be issued at the end of the day. This is the mechanism by which we pay for the bonds during that 15-year abatement period. You heard me talk about the fixed charge that will be collected from the developers during that period. This is the resolution where the authority now agrees to collect that fixed charge pursuant to an instrument called a declaration of covenants. The declaration of covenants is something that the property owners record of record on their land where they promise to pay the fixed charge pursuant to the terms of that declaration. So by state law, we're required to have one of these to collect any community development charge, including a charge like the fixed charge. We can't just go out willy-nilly imposing charges and collecting it. It's a contractual based agreement to pay. It is not like taxes where a city can either levy a tax within charter limitations or go to the voters and ask for additional taxes. We can't do that. We have to have an agreement with the property owners for everything that we collect from a community development charge standpoint. So in the declaration of covenants, the owners of each of the 3 initial projects have agreed to a maximum amount of fixed charges. We hope the end fixed charges are less if we get advantageous pricing on the bonds, but they can't be more than this unless the developers consent to something more. So the hotel agreed to pay around $116,000 per year during the abatement period. Apartments, $286,000, and office, $241,000. So it's our task and the task of the financing team to make sure the bonds work within these maximum amounts. And in fact, try to get the most advantageous bond structure possible so we can lower these amounts for the property owners. Again, our end goal is to raise enough money to build high water alley and the city improvements we don't need to raise more money than that. So we're going to do what we can to optimize the structure for all involved. It's just a note that from a property owner perspective, these fixed charges remain in place even after the abatement's over, but the property owners get credit for the TIF payments they're making as real property taxes. So put another way, if they don't make their tax payments, we still have bond payments. We're not getting any TIF money at that point. So we need a way to come after them to make sure we have enough money to make bond payments. But if they're making their tax payments on time, we don't have to collect the fixed charge after the abatement period. The declaration also provides property owners the option, but not the requirement, to levy things like a bed tax type charge. Again, it's not a tax, it's a charge. That is optional for really the hotel to levy. And we'll get more into that in the next resolution as part of Ben's presentation. And then there's also the option for a sales tax like charge. Again, it's not a tax. At this point, again, I think Ben is planning on that in his presentation for the hotel. I'm not aware of any other requests from any of the other developers to implement a sales tax type charge. But they always have the option to do so, and they can use that money to defray their fixed charges during the charge period. So this resolution at the end of the day just says, yes, now that we've agreed to issue bonds, we also need to agree to levy these charges in accordance with the declaration. They're customarily separate resolutions, but they really go hand in hand. So happy to pause now and take any questions that folks have.
All right, hearing no questions, is there a motion to approve?
Motion.
Second.
Moved by Ben, seconded, I believe, by Darren.
Correct.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? All right, and I'm assuming there's no abstentions. So let's move to our next resolution. That is resolution 2020-6.
Yep. And so what I'll do here is just start off with a very brief summary and then turn it over to Ben to talk a little bit more about this, since this is really his project as part of the hotel. But resolution 2020-6 at a high level authorizes $5 million of bonds to fund what are being called hotel community facilities. Ben will get into more detail, but there is an alley and a courtyard that's very public that's planned as part of the hotel development. There are community spaces on the first floor that'll be available to residents and employees of the community authority. There's a fitness and a yoga studio and a gear garage, lobby space, also all very public type amenities that are available to residents and employees with within the community authority, and also outdoor seating that will be enjoyed by more than just hotel guests. The maximum interest rate on this debt would be 6%. The bonds are likely going to be purchased by the hotel developer, although Ben can get into that a little bit more. There might be another potential bond purchaser, but unlike the bonds for Highwater Alley, these are not going to be marketed to the general public. This is for folks that are already involved in the hotel development. The bonds will be paid by bed charges and or sales charges from the hotel property only. They are not paid from the fixed charge that go for the Highwater Alley bonds, nor is there any TIF money that will be used for these community facilities. It is just revenue from the bed charges and or sales charges from the hotel property. And finally, the expectation is that the hotel operator will manage these facilities for the authority, again, taking care of the day-to-day overtime responsibility for these. So maybe, Ben, I'm going to advance it. These are
Sure.
the same slides that you presented at the last one, but let's just give the board a refresher and then we can entertain questions from the board. Ben,
Sure.
just let me know as you want me to advance this.
Sure. Thank you, Greg. And we did introduce this at the previous meeting just to make sure that everyone was familiar. And as Greg said, this is really the same mechanism that's being used for the overall development, just for a subset of kind of over enhancements or additional facilities that we wanted to provide for the benefit of the amenities of the development. These first two slides are just overall renderings. I think probably not the best angle for this, but just to remind everyone, the hotel sits at the center of what is phase one. So the center block between the residential and the office towers, facing directly COSI. And so this angle gives you the best view, which, as a reminder, the intent of this overall development is to be very dense and urban. And one of the things that we did was to kind of over amenitize one and then open it up so that, as you see, this angle is a little difficult, but is to try to open it up so that there's a central courtyard, which is part of the facilities. And what this will do is provide the center of activity for the development. And so what we wanted to do was create these community facilities that would amenitize the overall development. Greg, go ahead. Yeah, and I don't think it's probably not super helpful to walk through every one of these, but the intent again is that the overall development is intended to be highly amenitized, and we're providing kind of a central hub in community facilities. Greg, you already walked through Gear Garage, which is providing access to whether that's a bike or a kayak to utilize the Scioto mile that the city has provided for and really connect this to the river, fitness, outdoor and indoor gathering spaces, and again, make this the communal hub. Go ahead, Greg. Yeah, go ahead. So essentially, to summarize here, so this is an overview of the map, but essentially, this is as if you were looking at it from the aerial view. So we have the outdoor courtyard, the alleyway. We've seen this done, and actually our architect is the same group that did this in Denver, which was highly successful in the Lodo development there, to really create an interesting pedestrian environment, and that's what we're trying to contribute to here. And so, so we'll provide these spaces, and ultimately, in a similar fashion that the other streetscapes and improvements will be funded, we'll fund the same here. And we will ultimately provide a charge to our guests at the hotel in a similar way that other hotels and NTAs have done. And that will ultimately go to pay for the bonds, which will go to pay for the community spaces. That'll be generally available to the community within the development. So I think that's the summary. I'm happy to answer any questions. Recognize that was a little refresher and want to be cognizant of everyone's time, but happy to answer any questions. Trent, sure.
I have a question. I'm not sure if this question is for you, Ben, or maybe for Amy, but what is the plan for improving the appearance of the railroad crossing, the railroad bridges, both on the east and the west side of those overpasses, so that it's not just looking good for people coming into the development, but also looking good for the Franklinton neighborhood on the other side? Is there a plan within this scope of work that addresses that?
Amy, you want me to start and then defer to you for the rest? Sure. So this specific scope of work is we're in control of this component only for our parcel, which is this block, which is a subcomponent of phase one. To the larger expanse, I'll defer to Amy on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Trent. I know the city has looked at how the railroad bridges can be made part of something bigger. It is not currently part of Scioto Peninsula Holdings plan. And I will say that it's figuring out who owns what. When the railroad owns something, it's really tough to get them to allow you to do anything with it, even if it's making modifications that will help their infrastructure or real estate. But I know that's been brought up in several meetings that I've had with our city colleagues, but it's not part of this initial plan. Rory, if you have anything to add, I don't know if you've heard anything more.
I haven't. I do know, for instance, on the garage, that there will be public artwork in the form of wall murals that will be added to the garage to make those more aesthetically appealing. That was one of the conditions that the downtown commission had required in order to get the approval to move forward with the design. So I know that that's a part of it. But in terms of other items to kind of increase the attractiveness, considering the railroad bridges there, is I am not aware at this time of anything that we're doing there. I did have a separate question, and it came to me here just as we were talking. Ben, does Rockbridge have a supplier diversity plan for the work that's being done as a result of this resolution?
We don't have, we're open shop with our contractor Hunt. I know those have been bid right now. We've looked at that in other deals. I don't think we had a target or an agreement in here any different than I don't think all of the developers did. So I'd say, no, not specifically here. That was not part of our initial dialogue. Obviously we go through a thorough process locally to attract the best and widest and deepest sub-market that we can find, but ultimately our GC is in control of that.
Ben, in regards to, and maybe Rory touched on it with the artwork, what community conversations, or if any, have taken place?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things, and we're still, I think as a point of reference and ultimately signage and exterior art, there's a downtown commission has jurisdiction over that, but we have started conversations around one kind of signage that would be distinctive for the development and kind of, especially in that alleyway, engaging the community. That's what we've done in many other communities, both inside of the property and outside of the property. And so we're to the point now where the first phase is really get your architecture and your construction set. The second component is get your interior design and how you're decorating set. And then the third is signage and artwork. And so we're kind of coming around the corner to that signage and artwork. And that, frankly, that's the most exciting and kind of fun part. So that's part of our kind of branding and ethos. And so I think those conversations will be starting over the next handful of months as we get to that phase.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the question, Jason.
No problem.
I guess I just want to add, I would be remiss if I didn't. I guess I just want to add that I really want the railroad crossings to be a continuing theme as we have these conversations going forward, because this is the one thing that the neighborhood talked about over and over and over and over again. I mean, I know Amy already referenced that it's been brought up a lot in different meetings, but we've struggled. I've tried. I know how difficult they are to talk to and work with because I've tried to do it. And this seems like this is an opportunity to really leverage some influence and some goodwill towards the railroads to get them to agree to let us do something on both sides of the track. So I know we're not going to solve that problem here right now. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't bring that up on behalf of the neighborhood.
And I'd love to have additional conversations with you about what do you think that looks like, and and start a dialogue on maybe a long-term effort to address that.
Yeah. Because it doesn't need to be dramatic. I mean, I'm not talking about spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's just, it's got to be something though. There's got to be something there to make those railroad crossings on both sides of the tracks going look more appropriate to the type of development this is going to be. So, but again, I know this is down the road, but I didn't want to not say that at the initial phases of this conversation.
Well, Trent, it's a valid point because the railroad is an infrastructure, right? And it's been there a while. It's you know, it's really about making sure that the infrastructure is safe, because you're about to densify that entire area. You're gonna have a lot of construction there. And I think we should probably try to get some commitment from the railroad that at least they will look at the infrastructure and make sure that it's safe. And in doing so, they'll probably have to make some improvements to it.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? All right, is there a motion to approve?
I approve. I motion to approve.
All right, motion by Darren. Is there a second?
Second,
Second by Amy. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, is there any abstentions? All right, motion passes. Next item on the agenda is other business. Greg, is there any other business to go forward?
None that I'm aware of, but this is certainly a point where any of the trustees can bring forward any business they'd like to discuss that's not on the agenda. We want to make that opportunity available every meeting.
Anybody have anything they want to bring up? All right, then we'll move on to the next item is our next meeting.
Rory, again, this is something really there's 2 or 3 ways these board meetings get set for the next meeting. One is if there is business that folks are aware of to do. That's what we're doing here today. There was more business for us to do. And it's not uncommon to have a series of meetings early in the life of the community authority. We might need another meeting or 2 this fall. We don't have something set in stone where we need to establish a date, but I want to give the folks the impression that we're done for the year at this point. We might need to come back together. We will let you know if business comes up. In the normal course, authorities like this meet as often as the Board of Trustees wish them to meet, provided that we meet at least once a year. So some authorities just meet once a year. That's all the trustees want to meet. And if there's no other business reason to meet, we have an annual meeting. Some authorities meet more often. It's really up to the board. With that, I'd say maybe we'd have another meeting or 2 this fall, but absent that, we just might look at having a meeting next year. We re-elect officers, give updates on construction progress, things like that to the board. But certainly if board members want to meet, just let Rory know. Rory can call a meeting at any time, or any 3 board members. If they request a meeting, then we have to have a meeting.
I just have one really general question overall. So with this big construction project, and we're providing oversight for it, if there are environmental changes, and I don't know what they could be or what they will be, that could impact the project, what's the process to essentially resolve it, arbitrate it, so the project keeps moving, or accommodations are being made for any environmental changes or challenges to the project?
Yeah, so from a board perspective, really what would happen is if there is an issue that would cause us to exceed the budget for the project, that cannot be, in essence, the bonds we've approved. If it can't be paid from the bonds, if it can't be paid for the developer contribution, we need to come back together and, as a group, together with the developers, figure out a plan to address that. Beyond that, with the specific items that would come up in any construction project, that would be side of Peninsula Holdings' role to help resolve within the bond amount and the developer contribution amount. Just given the background of this project, and Amy, you can probably talk more about there's been an extensive amount of not only investigation, but environmental remediation over the years inside of Peninsula. This is a pretty well-known project site, especially for something like a roadway. So I think it's fair to say at this point, it'd be a really major unexpected surprise for anything unexpected like that.
Well, those are the ones I'm talking about, actually. Those are the ones I'm talking about. So I don't know what they could be, but I'm trying to understand what's the board's role in any of that. But if it's totally segregated to the Peninsula Holdings Company and the board is not involved, or we don't have to weigh in, once we sign off on these resolutions, that's what I'm trying to get a feel for.
Right, unless there's a major budget bust as a result of it. And then it's really a cooperative process. We need to come back together. There's going to be conversations with the city and the developers about, hey, what do we do now? This, no one ever expected a contingency like this to occur. And, we all have to work together to figure out a plan going forward. And maybe that would end up just involving the developers or just the city or all of us, including the authority. That would be a business item that we'd have to come back together to talk about.
Okay.
And there is contingency built into the estimates. We're not bidding a lot of this work for around, 14, 15 months. So there's a healthy contingency amount. There's a healthy escalation amount built into that. That's one of the reasons the developers brought up the topic that we discussed earlier of, hey, if we end up with excess money, what do we do with it? If we don't need all the developer contribution. But yeah, it could be that we need more than the developer contribution, and we're all getting back together and figuring out where the extra money comes from.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Trent. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ben. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? And any abstentions? All right. Thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate this. I know that there's been this month, there's been a lot to take in. I know it's probably like drinking water from a fire hose. But just really appreciate your attention, your service, and your expertise, and look forward to working with all of you for many years to come to make this a great place in our city.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.